Hello and welcome, I'm Kira Scribner, and today we're going to be doing my January wrap-up. We're not going to talk about it almost being the end of February. We're going to pretend like it's a crisp February 1st, guys, even though it's probably March. But here we go. I think I read 10 books here, maybe 9. I wanted to really start the year off with like reading a lot of books and getting a little bit ahead on my goals and stuff, and I instead kind of going a little bit below. On the other hand, I was really happy with the fact that I was reading a lot more physically, and I think I was kind of diving a little bit more in depth in these books. So that part was really, really exciting. Let's start off with the book that I chose to begin the year with, and that is Call Us What You Carry. And this is by Amanda Gorman. She was the woman who gave the inaugural poem. I'm not American, I don't know what it's called. Because Kara from the Wild Book Garden kept on talking about how much she loved her, I decided that I would give her poems a try, and I did, and I was just blown away. So when I picked up this collection after reading The Hill We Climb, I was just like I really loved it. I was immediately immersed. And then I really enjoyed the part about the soldiers where she reconstructed poems from the simplistic style of the way that the man gave his journals of a black soldier during World War I. The way that she used historical documents to kind of talk about race and to talk about pandemics and talk about all of these other social issues. She also did one with migration and the way they spoke about things. On the other hand, I thought that the 350 pages, however it was a little long for poetry. It was a little overwhelming. All of it was so good, but I feel like I would have preferred it at 100 pages at a time or 75 pages at a time, because it was so dense and because it covered so much ground, which I think is really awesome in a nonfiction work or novel. I feel like I need so much time to dive and think and devolve into what poetry is, that when it's so long, it takes me so long and it doesn't become as enjoyable as much. I found that with Audre Lorde. I love her poetry. I got all her collected poetry because that is what my library has. And I've been working through it for over a year and a half now because I love it so much. But I get so overwhelmed because I read 20 poems and I have to sit there for a week and think about them. Onto another book I absolutely loved is Gilded by Marissa Meyer. I think this was such a stellar book. I love Marissa Meyer, and I think that I'm kind of in love with the way she writes. I listen to her books and I'm just so immersed. And this was her first full-blown fantasy, and I loved it. It follows Sterilda, and she is a young miller's daughter. Well, she's 18, and she helps in the schoolyard because she wants anything other than spinning. She hates that. And she's kind of mischievous. She's always telling tales, and the school marm is don't do that and stuff like that. And it, she just has this really playfulness but also really affectionate, and I feel we so rarely get people who are, not goody two-shoes but also really affectionate. She's a full-blown troublemaker. She's yes, I'll go right, this is the last lie I tell, all these things. So but because she has this hopeful thing, she hears these voices in the night, on the night of the great hunt when everyone is supposed to be indoors. It's the undead hunt, and they take people, and there's all of these myths and legends about these people disappearing. But during the night she hears these things which sounds like children, and she goes out, and they're actually moss maids, and she hides them. She's hiding them in her little root cellar, and she goes out and she's trying to look like she's busy because the Urkling, the king of the undead and of the wild hunt and stuff like that, comes in and is questioning her, and she's well, yeah, dude, I'm collecting straw. And he's why are you doing that at 1 a.m. in the morning, on the snow-covered evening? And she's oh, don't you know it has to be on the full moon to get it? And she weaves her tail because that's her ability. Her eyes look kind of blackish, and she has been apparently blessed by this evil lying god, but everyone has always cursed her for that. And he can't really see her eyes and thinks that she's actually the daughter of the goddess Halda, who is the one who helps with horticulture and stuff like that. So he lets her go. But then the next month he comes back and he's yes, so what about that gold thing? I think that gold thing would be super great. I guess I didn't tell you, it's a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. So I think that it's really clever in the way that it's able to show her cleverness and the way on the reason why. And then she gets taken to the castle and stuff ensue. And I really enjoy the way that she incorporates many Germanic legends and the way that she retells the story, because it's not the traditional Rumpelstiltskin story. And I loved it. I love the characters, I love the stories, I love her heart, and I just related to her so deeply, and it made me really happy. We started off the year with 2 great picks, and then I made the worst mistake ever. And I was I want the sequel so much. I'm just gonna read Small Favors. I've been wanting to read Small Favors for a really long time. It's a Rumpelstiltskin telling. I love Aaron A. Craig. It's great. It's great. It's great. It's gonna be great. It was not a great decision. I think I could have loved this book a lot more if I had read it at a different time, but even though her other books is very high fantasy, 12 Dancing Princesses retelling in this kind of gothic castle, This is like a Wild West survival story dying in the cold, which is just not my vibe. I don't like the Wild West. I don't really like survival stories. They're not really my thing. So this definitely did not work for me in the same way, and I was really disappointed. And I think I wouldn't have been as disappointed if Gilded hadn't been as inventive and recreating, because it felt very kind of stayed a little bit too true to the retelling of this. And yeah, it didn't really do a lot for me. And I was really sad. I'm really excited to read more of Erin A. Craig. It's just, this book definitely was not read at the right time. A Snake Falls from Heaven follows both Ollie and Mina, and it is a great story. It is based on Indigenous legends and mythology, and it really takes Nina, who's living in kind of contemporary world right now. Her great-grandmother said that she's been living for like 190 years or whatever, and is telling these tales, and she's kind of like write down her tales and stuff like that, and she's using like Spanish and kind of like Google Translate to try to write down her stories and stuff. And then she dies and she's grieving and figuring out lives and stuff like that, and her grandmother owns like a bookstore, and it's like her story of like living in the world. And then on the other hand, we have this story of Ollie, who is a cottonmouth, and he can wear a false form and stuff like that. And I originally thought that he was in like our land, but he's in like a mythical land that is kind of on the other side, like it's another dimension. And both of their tales are so interesting. Like, he kind of gets kicked out of his mother's life, and like, not like everyone gets like kind of out of the nest at a certain age, and he's the last to go, and he's kind of like doing things and finding people. And I really love her like combination of like, her books are kind of middle grade, but they're also kind of not middle grade. They're very hard to think. I haven't read her first one yet, but that is exactly what I heard about her first one and how I felt about this one. And it was really good, and I really loved it. About 3/4 in, we kind of switch and their stories combine, and that's where it fell off a little bit. I thought that the slow and meandering way worked so well, and their part like was meandering and stuff like that. But I think Little Badger is very good at like writing those moments, and not as good at writing like scenes. And I'm not that way either. I hate action scenes, so I'm not going to complain. Like, I would have loved for her to just stay in like the like low-key, slow, Macaulay way. That would have been happy. But because she was trying to write action scenes and kind of just really brushed over them, I ended up confused so often, because I was like, wait, that happened? And then it's like, you know, like a dramatic scene in like 1 or 2 lines, and then it jumps to 2 weeks later, and I was like, wait, what? So I think that like, even though I really enjoyed the book, like I still gave it 4 stars because I really enjoyed the writing I read, the story, the mythology, the characters were all really great. I really wish it hadn't decided to be a little bit more action-packed, because it wasn't action-packed, and it felt like the story wasn't organically moving. I don't know, maybe that's just my complaint, but otherwise I really loved it, and I can't wait to read more of her books. My next book is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Oshiro, and I'm more and more confused the more books I read by this guy. Like, I read The Berry Giant and I hated it. It was so boring, although I read it years ago, so my mind could change on that one. And I read Claire in the Sun, and I was like overblown, and I was like, this is so good. I have an entire review about how much I love it and adore it, and like theories, and I had so many thoughts. And the more I think about the book, the more I like it. And then I have Never Let Me Go, and this is probably his most famous work, and I just felt apathetic. It's so funny to me, because so many things I heard around Claire in the Sun, the consistent complaint from people who were not as enthused about it, or like disliked it completely, or like DNF'd it, was that it was too similar to Never Let Me Go, and Never Let Me Go did it so much better. And I feel like I had the reverse action. Like, because I loved Claire in the Sun so much, I like couldn't be enthused about Never Let Me Go. Like, I think I knew the twist. Like, maybe if you didn't know the things about this book, you would like it better. And like, I'm not sure if it was supposed to be a love story. Like, the movie is very much a love story. I haven't watched it yet, but like reviews and stuff like that, and I'm like, that is not the mood that I got from here at all. But like, I did think that it dealt with like the complicatedness of growing up and stuff like that very good. And like, I really enjoyed so many aspects of it, but I just was not compelled. Like, I was kind of bored a little bit, like, and kind of like a little bit not completely there the whole time. It reminded me a lot of Atonement, which I felt very similarly about. Like, it has this interesting setup about when you're young and then years later and all of these things, and kind of looking back, and both of them did not work for me in like the grand way. And they're both like came out in like 2003, 2005 or whatever. So maybe it's just like that era of like Booker Prize writing that I'm just like, I'm good, man, I'm good. I feel like the last few books on here I've talked ad nauseum about, so forgive me in the future. And this is Today a Woman Went Mad in the Supermarket. And this might be like one of my new favorite books. Like, I've been thinking since the moment that I finished it that I want to reread it. This is a collection of short stories that was compiled in 2021 and put together by Hilma Wiltster. And she was an author who was born in like the 1930s. She's like 91 years old now, and she wrote primarily in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And these are her short stories about women. It deals with pregnancy, it deals with insomnia, it deals with motherhood. A woman who's like, you know, just freezes in the supermarket and is just like so run down by like her children and everything going on. And it's another woman looking at her and kind of helping her, and like the way that like the pressure of womanhood. There's another one where like this woman is pregnant and she's like trying to pretend like she's not pregnant. There's one where the couple just go over, like they've always lived in an apartment, and like on Sundays they'll sometimes go to like these fancy houses and think about it. And it's very much complimenting the world and like that slight unnervingness. Like I really, really love Shirley Jackson. Like the more I think about her, the more she becomes one of my favorite authors. And like I love this. This is definitely not as direct as some of Shirley Jackson's writing, but it just has that like little eeriness underneath the surface, which I love of the 60s and 70s. And you know, then it has these kind of recurring and various, there is various women throughout, but then there is several women who have multiple stories, and Polly is one of them, and her husband Howard. And then in 2020, Hilma Wilster wrote one about COVID and about like the story of this couple who've now been married for 70 years. And like the first story has them in like 1950 something, where like, you know, they accidentally get pregnant and like the woman doesn't really want to marry him because she's like, I'm not really super into this guy. And he's like, but I'm so excited for children. And she's like, are you? Like, you know, and then now they've been married for 70 years, and it's very interesting to see that. I find out afterwards that Hilma and her husband had a story during COVID about them having COVID and stuff like that, and how that affected their relationship. So I think that it's very honoring to her to write a story like 40 years after the last book in here and to kind of have this. And I really, really enjoyed the collection. I really, really enjoyed following these characters, and her writing. I wrote that it's like concise and introspective and funny, and yeah, I wish she had more writing because I want to read it. I liked The Warden so much that I wrote an entire paper about it. I was like, hey professor, I know that my assignment isn't completely about this, but I really, really want to talk about it, and it's a leadership class and it's about leadership. And he was like, yeah, I get what you're talking about. You definitely could have used this as an example, but you dedicated like 3 pages to this. And I was like, but I loved it so much. And he's like, yeah, don't do that next time. I was like, okay, I understand. But Anthony Trollope is so cool, and this is 1955, my first novel ever written by him. I really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, it's about this guy, and he has been the choir director and minister at this church for a very long time, and he's been the warden for the last 14 years, and meanwhile, he has an issue because a man who is also interested in his young daughter comes and is like, yeah, so let's talk. You get $800 a year for your payment of the warden. Meanwhile, these 12 men altogether only get $240 for all of their needs, and this does not completely feel fair. I did all the math because it was like 1 shilling and 6 inches, and it had been changed because at first it was only 6p, and I did so much math for this project that did not matter. But it made me really, really happy. Like, I keep on thinking about this book, and it's very interesting. And he's like, well, I've, you know, given them even some of my own money and stuff like that. Meanwhile, this man is like very convinced on the unlawfulness and that, you know, people should be more fair, which, you know, is my opinion. I lean very left, in case you want to know. You know, social work is my background and stuff like that. And I believe very much in like the fact that people caring for other people shouldn't make money off their pain or their service. Like, that's something that's very important to me. Anthony Trollope does not take my thoughts. He is kind of the opposite, that this man, you know, that how should people not be grateful for what they have, and if you don't have them? He's actually kind of like doing this maybe as a counter Charles Dickens with all this like, you know, orphans becoming rich. Like, who do you think you are, Charles? Who do you think you are? It's such an interesting book and conversation and philosophy on this, and the characters are so good. The writing is so funny. I love the self-referential, like, it's just making fun of itself. He's talking about being an author. It's great. And I loved it. And then I read the second book and I liked it less. Like, I still really liked it. And I came from this, like, I think I could read a book where I hated every character and the entire plot, and I would still love it because Anthony Trollope's writing is so good. This book, you know, he started off more concise. Like, the first book is only like 7 hours on audiobook. It's like 200 and some pages. This one is like 700 pages because once The Warden sold great, he's like, you know what? I can write lots on this. So he wrote lots on this. And I think that wasn't the greatest plan, because even though it's an interesting book, it definitely is not as concise, and it loses some threads and some characters are not in depth. Like, you would think that the characters would be more in depth in a 700-page book versus a 200-page book, but he has so many more characters and he doesn't give them the same amount of nuance or notion. But I don't know, it's still such an interesting book and I can't wait to read more of him. But it's like a solid 3-star, you know what I mean? Like, it's good, it's interesting. The writer is like 4.75, but the whole book is about a 3. The Cage by Martin Von James. He's a man who wrote one of the first graphic novels, and he wrote it in Toronto, which is super cool. And this is a story that is, I don't even know how to describe it. He wanted a story without characters. You know, he's in this kind of 1970s, let's deconstruct the way that we tell stories and all of these things. So he tells a story and he's like, what if we have this like, you know, kind of style where it's almost a documentary. So we have these things that are like, you know, televisions and all these modern things, meanwhile talking about it. And, you know, in the introduction, the dude is like, yeah, so I spent like, you know, 30 years, and I hated the book at first, and now I spent like 30 years reading it. I even at one point wrote through like all like 350 pages and like talked about what they could mean. And I still don't know. And like, you know, I can like that, but this book, you know, if this book had been like 50 to 100 pages, I think I would have loved it. 350 pages, it was a lot of like just repetitive, pretentious words. And I was like, you know, dude, I'm kind of done. I'm kind of done. And yeah, it was just not a book I overly enjoyed it, even though I can understand its artistic meanings and stuff. And those are the books that I read in January. I hope that you really enjoyed this. I also read parts of a few other books. I read parts of Gods and Jade and Shadow. I read about half of that, really enjoyed it, and I will talk about that in the February wrap-up. And then we have Kim Ji-yeon, born in 1982. I love this so much that I wanted to give him my whole time, and then I didn't, and like, I'm so regretting that I did not finish in January because it probably would have been one of my favorite books, and I think it's going to be one of my favorite books of the year. And then Interpreter of Valides. Also, I almost finished this in December, and I don't know, each story I read is just like so good. I hope you had a great month of reading. I hope that you have a great month of reading now. Tell me what is the favorite book that you've read recently, and leave a teacup in the thing because I love tea so much, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.